Okay, Fred, you want to come up and say a couple of words real quick to kick us off?
Just tell me when I'm going to meet a timer.
Oh, sure.
I'll set you establish.
Yeah, if you want to do it, that'd be great.
Hello. I'd like to thank the State Board and the Department for awarding NCCBL the opportunity and the privilege of leading the revisions of the minimum standards for public
Fred,
school.
can you introduce yourself first?
I'm Fred Bramante. I'm president of NCCBL, National Center for Competency-Based Learning. In my biased opinion, we've done our job well. We have led a more inclusive effort than all of the 306 revision efforts in the history of the Department of Education combined. I say that confidently as I've been the primary leader of this effort since 1992. The draft that is before you today includes recommendations from the dozens of meetings that we've had with various groups and amendments to the draft that amendments to the draft that entered rulemaking on February 15th. I am excited for our students and our education system. Our team, which included NEA President Megan Tuttle, NEA's Irv Richardson, NHSAA's Executive Director Mark McLean, New Hampshire Learning Initiative Chairman Val Zanchuk, Education Leadership Doctoral Candidate Nathan Harris, and Dr. Robert McLaughlin worked tirelessly in the best interests of our public schools. I am also aware that the State Board has not yet deliberated on these changes up to Section 306.25, which came from productive meetings with Commissioner Edelblut and Chairman Klein, assisted by Department personnel Liz Brown and Julie Shea. We encourage the State Board to support these recommendations. We are not insinuating that the document is perfect. I am enthusiastically hoping that we will hear specific suggestions today that will make it an even better document. For the back part of the document, we are hopeful that the methodology agreed upon during our meetings and discussions with Commissioner Edelblut and Christine Downing will yield excellent results, and look forward to the hearing on April 11th. In 2005, the New Hampshire State Board of Education started the competency-based learning movement, resulting in a number of national awards for the most innovative and ambitious changes in any state's education regulations in a century, thus changing the K-12 direction of the entire country. But in my opinion, New Hampshire has since lost some ground as other states have embraced competency-based learning. I believe that these revisions, when passed into rules, should once again put New Hampshire in its rightful place as the leader of the movement. Our recommendations are not intended to be all things to all people, but for those who are supportive of student-centered learning, where students have more ownership of their education and agree with an "it takes a village" philosophy, they too should be excited about this draft. We wish good luck to the State Board during these important times as you bear the great responsibility of determining which recommendations to include in crafting the best education system for the students of New Hampshire. Once again, we hope that you will approve the recommendations from our team. Lastly, in previous 306 redesign efforts, I have spoken to students about how, for the first time, they were going to hear a presentation about rules and regulations that they were going to actually love. I'd like to suggest that when the time is right, we ask the schools for the opportunity to speak to their students and possibly their parents about these revisions. NCCBL stands ready to help. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. Val Zanchuk.
Mr. Chairman, I'll defer comments at this time.
Oh, okay. Mark McLean, are you here?
Good afternoon. I think this is the first time I've sat in front of a WMUR microphone. Thank you, Mr. Klein and members of the State Board for the opportunity to comment on the Ed 306 minimum standards. My name is Mark McLean. I'm proud to be the Executive Director of the New Hampshire School Administrators Association. I have been fortunate to provide feedback over the last several months as the 306 rules have continued to be edited. There have been a lot of aspirational conversations regarding the standards. We hope these aspirations are included in the improved version of the minimum standards. The State Board has a significant opportunity to listen to the feedback and recommendations that have been offered over the last 3 years and to respect and value the insights, expertise, time, and commitment of everyone who has been involved in the process. The State Board should approve 306 rules that support public schools and their continued growth and innovation efforts, provide equitable access to learning for all students, advance competency-based education, and reestablish New Hampshire as a leading state in education innovation, as well as creating a framework for future evolvement and further advancements, to include overt connections with New Hampshire businesses, and importantly, to help forge a collaborative relationship between the State Board, the department, students, families, educators, and education leaders throughout the state. To that end, we hope that the State Board will understand that the 306 standards help ensure equitable access in terms of educational opportunities for school districts and students across the state. Approve standards that include research-based and peer-reviewed definitions. Work with the department to provide technical advisories, training, and resources for districts as they continue to implement the 306 standards. Consider a phased-in approach to the adoption of courses connected to SB 216. To do this correctly will require support, resources, collaboration, and of course a little bit of time. Please understand that class size standards are not a bureaucratic tool. Having guidelines for class sizes helps districts to create budgets, to allocate resources, which include supplies and personnel, and create schedules. Class size standards do not limit innovation and creativity. Please listen to the feedback from educators regarding the back half of the document as well, minimum standards 0.31 through 0.48. We're really hopeful that this great opportunity that State Board has in front of them today will prove as a hallmark effort in establishing New Hampshire again as an innovative state, helping our students continue their learning, and empowering educators across the state. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Janet Ward.
And just let Janet, you're up now, and then maybe just call the on deck person so they'll know we're coming.
Patricia Elderkin is next, if you're out there.
Good afternoon. My name is Janet Ward. I'm from Hopkinton, New Hampshire. I'm the Vice President of the League of Women Voters of New Hampshire. In 2017, after a presentation by newly appointed Commissioner Edelblut, during which the Commissioner failed to provide an answer to the question, how do you see the role of public schools in our democracy? Our organization decided to re-examine this question. After considerable study, discussion, and debate, our members reached consensus. We believe that our public schools play an essential role in our democracy. The League voted to support our public schools. I am here today with one question, which I will direct to the Commissioner. The question is a simple one, which Commissioner Edelblut knows that I've been interested in since 2017, had a private conversation in December 2019, asked him this question, did not get an answer. So here's the question. Why have you chosen to recommend revisions to the 306 rules, which so clearly, indeed blatantly, undermine our public schools? That is my question.
Just all due respect, Janet, this is for us to get feedback from you. It's not a conversation forum, so I don't anticipate having conversation. with
No,
you.
I'm not anticipating a conversation, I'm just laying the question on the table.
Okay,
Chairman Klein,
all right. Thank
All
you for
right.
your comments.
thank you.
Patricia Elderton, did I get that? Okay, thank you. Sarah Robinson?
Hi everyone, how are we doing? Commissioner, Mr. Chair, State Board of Education, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. My name is Sarah Robinson. I'm the Education Justice Campaign Director for Granite State Progress. I've testified, I apologize, another qualifier of mine is I'm a mother of 2 elementary age children who attend our local public school. It's an important factor in my life. I've testified in front of this board several times over the past few years regarding the ED 306s, the process by which they have been addressed, and the content of the revised versions. The frustrating truth is that through these various iterations, those concerns, which are shared among many public education supporters and advocates, have not been sufficiently addressed. If the current draft goes into law, the public schools we cherish and serve will no longer have the robust support of well-defined and rigorous academic standards, leading to an advanced bleeding of resources, especially from rural and underserved districts. It is also important to validate that the primary audience for this document are our superintendents. As the CEOs of our public schools, they need these manuals of operation to be precise and descriptive. The hollowing out of instructional requirements, vague and sterile definitions, and altering the role of the school from determining the path of credits earned for graduation to simply ensuring that learning opportunities lead to graduation do not give our administrative teams the authority they need to effectively guide their public school to a level of excellence that reflects the needs and desires of their local communities. Specifically, the pro-public education supporters and advocates that I work with have the following concerns about the drafts. It redefines the purpose and structure of a school, such as changing courses to learning opportunities. The draft hollows out instructional requirements by no longer applying the responsibility of certified educators to approve a student's demonstration of competency. It also removes local authority to define district competencies, courses, and credits that lead to graduation. There are, of course, potential funding implications with all of these changes. The key language shift from shall to may that strips requirements for academic content areas is reminiscent of HB 1671, which sought to strip requirements for academic content areas. I believe the best course of action moving forward is to reapprove the current 306 rules, then revisit the editing process and make updates as necessary. The rules already in existence do a fine job of helping schools run at present. Reverting to the existing language and being more intentional with the editing process by making sure we have qualified educators, parents, and other stakeholders helping to write the updated rules will be a crucial step forward in giving the public and administrators confidence in the results. The most qualified individuals to task with updating the ED 306s are the people who are on the front lines of public education. Educators are continually on the cusp of education innovation, improving their skill set and advancing their careers so that our students are able to succeed in ways previous generations only dreamed of. Please accept their guidance, especially by listening to the educator feedback gathered through the listening sessions convened by Christine Downing. I have a little bit left, but I'll submit that electronically for your review.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Adam Osborne?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today and to share my perspective. My name is Adam Osborne, and I am a Goffstown resident as well as a public school principal in our state. I considered the proposed changes to the Ed 306 rules, as I understand them, and certain themes emerged and carried with them a number of potential challenges for public education across our state. The overall effect of the changes appear to be focused on creating a much less prescriptive version of public schooling that will enable communities to make choices about the many aspects of their educational programs. Due to the many times that the rules as proposed substitute may in place of shall, the results of these changes change of wording will allow to serve districts to cut or reduce programming. This will necessarily result in our students losing access to opportunities. Additionally, I believe that the flexible guidance around class sizes will similarly result in a ratio of students to teachers that will increase. For example, as towns look for ways to save money and consolidate their resources, they could easily reduce 5 second-grade classrooms into 4, because it sounds reasonable and relatively harmless. But the end result of this is really turning classrooms of 27-year-olds into classrooms of 25 7-year-olds. And that is a significant change, and that will have a meaningful impact on those children's education. Again, the flexibility of liberalizing the rules around having a certified teacher in front of students may intuitively appear to widen the applicant pool. However, the concern is that this will serve to reduce the preparedness and qualifications of the people being hired. Changing the wording within the EDC 306 rules from shall to may will open the door for many communities to reduce the number of opportunities for their students. This will increase the disparity between communities and what is offered to their youth. This inequity has been a long-standing flashpoint economically within our state. Both the Claremont lawsuit of the 90s and the more recent litigation of the Conval District illustrate this inequity as it exists. Although the changes are framed around increasing flexibility for communities and school districts, the reality is this will allow school districts to provide a lower quality educational opportunity, even the section of the ED 306 is dealing with the basic cleaning of the building has become optional. The local school board shall provide for each school such custodial services as are necessary to ensure a clean, sanitary, and safe physical plant and grounds has been struck. That's 0.9 or 0.09. That's both scary and telling, as these changes represent an abdication of responsibility for educating our youth in our state. We need to have clean and safe schools. In closing, I have significant concerns regarding the proposed changes and would respectfully ask the State Board of Education to not approve the changes as they are currently presented, as this will result in the lowering of educational expectations in our New Hampshire communities. My concern is for our students and the future of our state. Thank you very much.
Dean Cascade.
How you doing? We've been here before, talking about the ED 306s. Dean Cascade, Meredith, New Hampshire. I represent myself today. That's it. I'm a lifelong resident of New Hampshire. And this t-shirt says, I love New Hampshire public education. I do. I love it. I really do. Graduated from Wilton High School in '79, went to Dartmouth College, began a career in the Upper Valley in both public and private schools. Rich private schools, faith-based school in a basement, struggling to survive. I've been in the North Country, the Lakes region, the Upper Valley, the Capital region. I've been in rich towns, I've been in poor towns. And the problem is New Hampshire public schools are locally controlled and locally funded mostly by property tax. And property tax leads to a wide variation in educational opportunity. Our public schools are the hubs for our community. We cheer on our students there, we gather when there is tragedy, and they are the centers of our communities. And when government funds a public good like education, it should be distributed equitably and without discrimination. Public schools are committed to an equitable access to an adequate education for all students everywhere. All students everywhere. And New Hampshire public schools have worked toward that. Property values unevenly distributed. I live in Meriden. I live around a lake. It is awesome. But besides that, we have a ton of very valuable property that supports our public education. That's great. I've worked in rich towns. I've worked in poor towns where the opposite is true, and you are trying to provide minimum educational services on a tax base that's hard. So property valuation is unevenly distributed in an equitable way to fund the common good. We've known this. I mean, Claremont, 1993, back and forth for 20 or 30 years, now the RAND, now the Conval lawsuit, we know it. The ED 306s have been critical in making a fundamentally unfair system more equitable. And that's what I come to say today. You know, it's a sham that we provide an adequate education with the little money that we provide. Rich towns can provide a great education, and poor towns struggle to just provide an opportunity for an adequate education. And my fear is that the weakening of the ED 306s is just going to lead more inequity in our system. So I'm retiring. I'm tired. I fought the good fight. But the system's kind of broken. And, you know, I believe that public education has been an economic driver in this country. When we celebrate and support all in our community, and we give them an equitable opportunity toward adequate education, our country grows stronger. I fear for the future of public education. It's been a great ride, but my 3 minutes are up. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Dean. Christine Downing. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I was just saying, do we have a page number? Right.
Christine Downing, Goshen resident, longtime educator, public school educator and administrator for over 3 decades. Public school advocate, I guess I would call myself these days. Passing around is my report. Within the last 20 days, I have run 10 full-day educator review sessions around sections 306.31 to .49, which will be next week. You'll get a more detailed report from me for next week. However, I wanted to speak specifics today because some of the educators did have some time to review the sections we're talking about today. So I'm going to skip some of the introduction stuff and get right to the specifics. So 6 key highlights. Number 1, definitions are important to the full set of these rules. It's important to retain technical language in many definitions to support a consistent and shared interpretation of these important tenets of competency-based education. Like Fred, I'm a firm believer in competency-based education. These definitions were missing when we tried this over a decade and a half ago. So really pay attention to the definitions. There's an appendix in my report that details out the definitions that educators provided feedback on. Number 2, class size. Please restore the parameters on class size. And again, there's comments and recommendations from the educators in my chart in the report. Career technical ed programs. I know that section is in this part of it. I would encourage the board to delay any changes to that section at this point in time because I had about 12 CTE directors and various educators in the sessions that are looking at combining that with the curriculum section that exists in the other part. So I think there's an opportunity here to meld those 2 sections together. 4, restore the assessment section, particularly the assessment parts that were written about competency-based assessment. In my report, in Appendix B, there's information about competency-based ed research and definitions related to that and the important role assessment plays in that model. Number 5, this is a biggie. There's a separate appendix in my report from about a dozen school psychologists as well as the state association that supports our school psychologists, and they have rewritten that section completely. So please look at what they're suggesting in terms of the school psychological services. And lastly, I only had 3 days to turn this around. I finished my last session last Friday. There needs to be further analysis on the K-8 curriculum section, the high school curriculum section, and the high school graduation. Again, in my report, you will see some of the top level questions that have come out of those reviews. While the 306 rules have a variety of stakeholders that are responsible for the implementation of the rules to ensure an adequate education, I would encourage you to carefully review these suggestions from the educators because they took really thoughtful time in analyzing and putting forth some comments and suggestions in language, in wording. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan Miner.
Extra.
Thank you. You got Dan Miner?
Yes,
Okay. Rob Millay, get that right, from Keene?
He's got the same shirt as Dean.
Yeah, we just swapped it out.
Okay.
You got a shirt on back there, Dean?
I got the New Hampshire one.
Good afternoon. Thank you to the board, Commissioner Edelblue, Deputy Commissioner Brennan. My name is Rob Millay, and I'm from Keene, New Hampshire. I'm the superintendent of SAU 29, which covers the independent districts of Chesterfield, Harrisville, Keene, Marlborough, Marlow, Nelson, and Westmoreland. I have submitted my written testimony earlier today, so I will be brief with my comments. I have learned as a parent of 3 teenage boys the difference between wanting and needing to hear what others have to say is relative to the level of importance. They may not want to hear me when I tell them they need to eat their vegetables, do their chores, do their homework, or slow down when they're driving, but they absolutely need to hear it. I think that is reflective of the many inputs that you're getting here today and will continue to receive as you work through the Ed 306 revisions. The review and revision of the Ed 306 minimum standards is perhaps the most important thing that you will do during your time on the board. It is a big responsibility that may define your contribution to our state's public education system. They become a reflection of your stated mission and vision for public education here in New Hampshire. They not only impact the more than 160,000 students who are enrolled in our public schools, but also their families, our staff, and our communities. They, along with all of the ed rules, are not political playgrounds to advance party agendas, regardless of what party that is. Do the standards need to be updated? I don't believe anyone would disagree that they do. Unfortunately, the process that was used to produce what was submitted to you has exacerbated high levels of mistrust from within our education, our state's education leadership. You don't have to take my word on that. Just listen to what is being said. Better yet, ask the nearly 91% of the 350 respondents that confirmed they do not support the revisions that were submitted to you in February. Fortunately, it's not too late. It is within your authority to set clear definitions and expectations that will advance student growth by requiring equitable access, quality programs, and high standards in all of our public schools for all of our students, to align our standards with the stated mission and vision of this board, to get it right. Thank you.
David Trump.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Edelblut and members of the committee. My name is David Trumbull. I'm from the town of Ware. I oppose these regulations as they're written for a number of reasons. First is that the guarantee of substantive educational programs, that is an inputs-based system of education, is required by New Hampshire statute and protected by our Constitution. Let's go back to 2007 when the New Hampshire legislature amended RSA 193E, which spells out how the state will guarantee that every child in the public schools has an opportunity for an adequate public education. The legislature acted bipartisanly and bicamerally with broad public support. They were responding to the Londonderry Supreme Court case, which said in the legislature, it's your job to specifically tell us the educational program that will make sure we deliver an adequate education. The court held without this, the public will never know if we're actually living up to our duty and if there's any accountability. And 193 lays that out. In 2018, 193E was amended again in Section B to mandate the use of input-based accountability. In the legislative history in 2018, it was stated that a school must demonstrate that it is providing an adequate education by both the input and performance-based systems, not just one. In other words, it would be against state statute for a school to say as long as our kids meet some sort of performance standard, we don't have to have input accountability. But these regulations, as they're written, upend the entire system of education in the state to say as long as students meet some kind of performance standard, the inputs don't matter anymore. So the question becomes,
Can an administrative agency make a change of that magnitude? And the answer is no. The New Hampshire Supreme Court was asked that question back in 1981 when the Administrative Procedures Act was amended. What's the constitutional things that administrative agencies can do? And they said they can do one thing only. They must fill in the details. Administrative agencies can't change laws. They can't add to, subtract from in any way. You can only fill in the details. Administrative agencies cannot, quote, substitute its will for that of the legislature. That's what's happening with these regulations. Specifically, if you look through the regulations, I'll give you several examples where that is happening. Number one, Section 20C changes the policy that school boards set instructional time for all subject matters. No longer would time be a factor. In Section 21E, it changes the policy that schools shall offer a program of studies to a policy based solely on demonstrating proficiency. In Section 31 and forward, it changes the requirement that schools shall provide specific educational instruction. The schools may provide such instruction. In Section 14, it eliminates the maximum class size. And in Section 12A5, it eliminates the requirement for certified teachers in art, music, health, and physical education, all of which, by the way, are mentioned specifically in 193E. These regulations change educational policy. I think they're bad policy, but I'm just going to stick to one argument today. They change educational policy. That can only be done by the legislature. Thank you.
Eric, wrong word?
Proper. You remember Eric.
Yeah, just sometimes the handwriting.
Left-handed male, I apologize. Commissioner, Mr. Chair, Board. My name is Eric Frowerth. I'm the CTE Director at the Wilbur H. Palmer Career and Technical Education Center at Alvern High School in Hudson. And I'm here on behalf of NICTA, our statewide professional association representing career and tech administrators. We serve over 400 teachers and staff statewide and support nearly 9,500 students in career and tech education. As currently drafted in the February 15, 2024 proposal, these rules have a detrimental impact on the delivery of career and technical education statewide. Our concerns fall into three major themes. Barriers that will prevent the successful implementation of CTE for New Hampshire students, the lack of clarity that sits in the current proposed rules, and we have significant issues with equity and access for each and every student in the Granite State. The current proposal, the minimum standards, reverses and consequently impacts the successful implementation of CTE in many ways. The complete elimination of minor assignment under provision of staff and staff qualifications. The ability for a school principal or CTE director to assign a professional educator outside their certification area will limit the programming and flexibility CTE centers need to deliver high-quality education. It's not unusual for an engineering teacher to have a minor assignment to teach math, or a criminal justice teacher to teach a class in law or civics. This flexibility and local decision-making is essential for our centers and schools. The required courses of study. Under this section of rules, the new course of study is proposed for 20-credit high school diploma. Students enrolled in CTE will no longer be able to graduate with a 20-credit diploma, as a CTE pathway assumes far more than 2.5 elective credits. The impact of this policy change could impact enrollments, student voice and choice, and more importantly, deter students from pursuing programming aligned to their passions. Lastly, this draft requires a new school district policy which states how high school credit is awarded to students based upon demonstrated proficiencies of competencies regardless of age and enrollment status. Federal Perkins 5 legislation requires CTE concentrators to complete at least 2 courses in a single program of study. This new policy will critically impact the quality of CTE programs in New Hampshire and likely have significant impacts to federal regulations under Perkins 5 and the associated funding. Rules, by their very nature, are intended to offer clarity, not confusion. Vague language is used throughout with limited definitions and little to no context. Examples of this include terminology such as learning opportunities as a replacement for courses and programs, and the removal of teaching and replacing it with facilitating learning. There are also inconsistencies in edits throughout the document. Program of study has been removed and eliminated and replaced with course of study. Yet the phrase program of study continues to be referenced under Ed 306-2-1. Our final area of concern has to do with access and equity. I guess I will stop there.
No, and you got that to leave with us?
We will have a formal draft to submit it.
Thank you.
Yeah, Eric, if you just email it to me, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
To
Yeah.
Julie.
Sure thing.
All right. Megan, Tuttle.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner members of the State Board of Education, for the record, my name is Megan Tuttle, President for NEA New Hampshire, representing about 17,000 public school educators across our state. And these are the professionals who serve 90% of New Hampshire students who attend our K-12 public schools. The minimum standards for public school approval impacts those educators and the students they work with every day. So first, let me just say this has been a process, I'll say that, to get educators to participate in. Those include all the ones that we represent. I would like to publicly thank Christine Downing for all the countless volunteer hours she invested to help make sure that educator voices were finally represented in that process. And we do appreciate the opportunity to finally contribute to the process to what some have called the Working Group 2. I think that's what we're being called, which began its work late in 2023. Unfortunately, the work product that that group produced is not before you on the table today. The initial proposal the State Board of Education is considering still fails to address many of the concerns that were identified by NEA New Hampshire and other public education leaders. We've taken every opportunity that we can to share our feedback about this public proposal, but work still continues to need to be done to improve the draft revision yet again. From the start, we've been able to somewhat engage in this process, and we've advocated for certain school standards that maintain and improve high standards, not lower them. We should be articulating curriculum standards to our school to ensure that expectations are clear about what students should know and be able to do upon graduation from a public school in our state. Unfortunately, this initial proposal does not do that because changing shall to may makes these expectations permissive rather than required. We want to maintain high standards for public school educators. We should not be making it optional for our public schools to require the hiring of certified educators. This is not going to serve our students well. Educators are professionals, and standards will help ensure quality education. We want to strive for smaller class sizes, not larger ones. We should be maintaining class size limits to ensure educators can adequately provide high-quality instruction to all Granite State students that meet their individual learning needs. Parents and students want class sizes that allow for more individual attention. Removing class size limits would be a disservice to students, families, and educators. We need to be protecting local competencies, local graduation requirements, and local assessments to ensure public education meets the needs of individual communities and their students. We need to be maintaining the use of the term grade level as opposed to learning level when referencing the configuration of school organization. As every educator knows, these terms are not synonymous. And for the rules to imply otherwise would be inappropriate and could weaken a school's responsibility to educate children. The structure of our school buildings, state and federal assessments and accountability are done by grade level, and without that, the schools would be out of compliance. We need to preserve language that addresses equity and fairness because public schools do educate all students, and educators should be working to identify and eliminate any barriers that prevent students from a quality education. So in conclusion, we feel the initial proposal approved by the State Board does not yet meet these standards we set out to ensure as part of our participation in this process. And I will be back next Thursday to continue it. Sorry about that.
No, it's great. You're perfect. Thanks, Megan.
Thank you.
Michaela Demeter.
Good afternoon, my name is Michaela Demeter. I speak today as a member of and on behalf of the Dover School Board. School boards across the state all require clear, robust, and uniform guidance to ensure each New Hampshire student receives an equitable and adequate education. The board wishes to express its concerns with the Department of Education's draft version of the Ed 306 minimum standards for public school approval. Commissioner Edelblu's proposed changes walk back the state's responsibility to define an adequate education, which then absolves the state of its future responsibility to pay for that adequate education. If this responsibility is largely left to local school boards, an adequate education may look different in each district, thereby exacerbating the deep inequities we know exist in our state at this time. Further, this absolution of responsibility by the state leaves local school boards to face the frustration of taxpayers who are already paying over 70% of local school costs. Districts need guidance on what they should offer, so there's equity from district to district, but also because the state must define an adequate education. The Dover School Board has identified many examples of the watering down of education standards throughout this proposal. A language shift from teaching students to facilitating learning sends the wrong message to our education community by removing the expectation that teachers are the orchestrators of learning experiences. Schools are schools because they contain qualified and certified teachers to do the teaching. The Dover School Board opposes any language change that removes the requirement for a teacher to do the teaching. The proposed language is vague and concerning. In Dover, we have worked diligently to keep our class sizes as low as financially possible. Our board is opposed to the proposed removal of all maximum class size limitations. Significant research supports the understanding that smaller class sizes are linked to better educational outcomes, particularly in early elementary grades. The Dover School Board is concerned that a lack of maximum class size regulations will only augment learning inequities in districts that already struggle to educate their students with limited resources. Further, districts that could not afford to maintain lower class sizes would struggle even more to hire and retain qualified educators. One of our chief responsibilities as a board involves creating and modifying district policies that guide school governance. Current law requires school boards to create policies governing the assessment and review of instructional materials. With the proposed change from instructional materials to learning resources, the watering down continues. What exactly are learning resources, and how do school boards regulate such a vague term? Finally, the school board has overseen our district's transition to a competency-based education model over the past few years. The proposed language change once again waters down the expectation of mastery to proficiency when considering whether a student has achieved learning sufficient to earn course credit. Proficiency, as defined in your document, is the minimum student performance required to satisfy the achievement of a competency, but the definition is not clear enough to ensure that proficiency means the same thing from district to district. This is my last sentence, I promise. We reject the notion that our students in New Hampshire should learn under ill-defined and anemic standards, and we stand opposed to any changes that would decrease equity across the state. For these reasons, the Dover School Board does not support the current Ed 306 changes as proposed. Thank you.
Ryan Balky.
Good afternoon. My name is Brian Balky. I'm the superintendent of schools in Goffstown, serving the communities of Goffstown and New Boston and SAU 19. I'm a resident of New Boston. This is not my first time in front of a WMUR microphone, so in contrast to other speakers. I'm here today to raise one premise and provide a couple of specifics that I'd like the board to consider as you work on the ED 306 standards. The first one is an ideological and a philosophical one. I'm here to make the case and to raise the construct that the purpose of these rules is to reduce what the state is potentially responsible for when it comes to funding. Reduce the standard. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you laugh there, Chairman Klein. That was
Go right ahead.
a little disruptive to me. The premise is if you reduce the standards, you therefore reduce what the state has to pay for. You don't have to look very far past Conval to see that play out. That's my premise. Standards should be changed to increase educational outcomes, not to reduce the state's perceived cost that they might have to pay for a public education. Two specifics. ED 306.18. I would like the board to consider adding, under the remote learning section, I would like the board to consider remote learning due to elections. So it says specifically in 306.18 that we can do remote learning for inclement weather. I would like the board to consider adding language that adds the option due to elections. When we have primary years, we have 3 elections in those years, and many of our public schools are the polling places. Elections have an impact on us. I would like to make that request. I would also request the board to consider remote learning due to facilities-related issues. That could be power outages, heating issues, etc. If we have the flexibility to be able to do that with one school, we may be able to just have one school being remote as opposed to having to close all of our schools. So those two things. The next section I'd like to speak to is 306.46. And I would share that I am the chair of the New Hampshire Holocaust and Genocide Education Commission. I am speaking not as the chair of that. We have not had a meeting. But I would like to share a few section changes on this. I sat before this board 2 years ago, and we talked about these proposed rule changes. And now they're being changed again. My question is why? We've had 2 years of implementation, and we have not yet had any data collection to know how schools are doing with these proposed challenges. So here's the first thing. The rules here would change from school districts must provide to may include. I don't understand why that is. In fact, this past January, all public schools had to provide input through IBAS, the Input-Based Accountability System. We haven't even collected the data, and now the proposed rules seek to change it. Thank you.
Nick from Concord, you're going to have to help me with your last name. Nick P. from Concord. Okay. Christy Michaud from Milford. Defer. All right. We have time. If you guys wanna, we're here. We're here.
I'll take another 3 minutes.
Yeah, I knew that was coming.
I knew that was coming.
Sydney Leggett.
Hello.
Hi, Sydney.
Thank you for the time today. I imagine, even if you haven't seen the film, that you're familiar with the phrase "everything, everywhere, all at once," right?
Good movie.
Good movie.
Strange movie.
Well, I'm glad because it's going to stick in your head because I'm here to tell you today that I am a proponent of every kid, everywhere, and all means all. For every kid, even though kids often don't like rules, kids would like these. The 306 rules offer the guarantee that every kid has the same access and opportunity to make their life what they want and need it to be. More than anyone, kids know that one size does not fit all. Offering a strong, adequate education to every kid means that student differences can be honored and appreciated, while there are common standards across the state to ensure quality and equity. Every kid deserves high-quality standards with elements such as required program elements, class size limits, certification standards for educators, and differentiation for all. I'm going to move on to everywhere. As many across New Hampshire are already aware, funding our schools falls on the back of local taxpayers. Our communities and our schools are victims of a zip code lottery, and budgets are created by balancing the will and the tax burden on local taxpayers. Having just completed 2 budget seasons in New Hampshire, because I serve 2 districts, I can attest to how hard this is on our communities. Changes in the 306s in terms of what's required versus what's optional will make this much worse depending on where you live. In the current rules, a New Hampshire high school diploma has a fundamental consistent meaning, that the student has achieved the same requirements for an adequate education as every other New Hampshire school, and I believe in revisions there are ways to even make this better and stronger. Eliminating common adequacy for high school standards puts this in jeopardy. As one of my colleagues recently stated, the 306s were never really intended to be something you trip over when you walk in the room. They're intended to be rigorous, meaningful, and something New Hampshire should feel proud of. Please be sure to only approve 306 rules that create a strong foundation everywhere. Finally, all means all. So if the proposed rules, as they are, get approved, will a New Hampshire high school diploma mean the same thing among our state schools? Will it still mean the same thing in other states? To colleges and universities? To employers? Weakening the requirements of the 306s widens the gap to access and opportunity, putting every child's future in jeopardy. As an educator, I want everyone to see a New Hampshire diploma and know that it means quality. Public schools are the great equalizer, and these rules hold us to that. The proposed rules are written to open the door also to businesses to sell credit. For the record, I am completely in favor of business partnerships with schools. And it happens all over the state at no cost through our ELOs or our extended learning opportunities. In the fact, where most of the districts that I serve, where most of them attend high school, They have done well over 300 of these business connections per year. And of those 300, they are all available to all, and they are all free. Kids are not customers. We can't allow any family's financial resources to dictate an education. Our public schools need to be the level playing field sanctuary that protects our future. It's critical that all across New Hampshire we support rigorous, fair, and comprehensive education rules that keep our state among the best in the nation. Our kids and our communities deserve nothing less. I believe we've all made a promise to New Hampshire kids to once again serve every kid, everywhere, when all means all. And I'm asking the state board to hold to that promise. Thank you.
Elizabeth Corral from Concord.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Elizabeth Corral. I live here in Concord, and I previously lived in the Bedford area and used the Manchester school system, and my kids also, when we moved here, went into the Concord school system. Like Christine and many in the audience, I'm an avid advocate for public education. And I say that as a product of it and as a parent of 2 adult males who have thrived because of their public education. Not unusual. This is common for many of us. However, I'd like to highlight a little further that my elder son has special needs. Now, many of us know, as we've read our papers recently, the struggles that all of the towns have had with their budgets. And often, one of the most significant components is special ed expense. We know that it's difficult and challenging, but it's also vital. And I'm concerned as I hear the terms may rather than shall, how a child who struggles for a lot of different reasons, there's a full spectrum of why our kids are considered SPED, needs those services and the expenses that come along with that. I say shall versus may because I know I've witnessed it in the Concord school system, but we hear about it in Pembroke and Ware and all the surrounding communities, the financial struggle. I'm a taxpayer. We're all taxpayers. We know property taxes are going up. And we know if a school needs to cut their budget to hear the voices of their property tax owners, the shalls instead of the mays makes a big difference. My sons both went on to college. My SPED son went on to Running Start. It was the difference between him ending at the high school level with a degree versus going on. He has been employed successfully at Southern New Hampshire University for more than 10 years. He's a professional. I can tell you if he didn't get a quality education through the professionals in that school systems, because we came through many different schools, and I'm talking about both guidance and all the people who are in the classroom as well, I wouldn't have a person who is a full citizen also paying taxes. So with that, I would like to leave with you, make sure that qualifications for the educators and the professionals in the school stay high. Thank you.
Greg Leonard.
Like your best. Good afternoon to all the members here of the New Hampshire School Board and everyone else who came here to see this hearing today. My name is Greg Leonard. I'm a resident of Keene, New Hampshire, and for the past 30 years, I've been a public school teacher in the Granite State. I'm here today because I'm concerned that the proposed changes in 306 rules could do irreparable harm to the children in our state. There are a number of proposed changes that have brought me to this position, and among them are the concerns that research-based evidence
hasn't been shared with the citizens to justify the wholesale changes to the rules. There is a disregard for the democratic process and how the changes could impact the accreditation of our public schools. In a general practice, educators are constantly reflecting on their practices to improve students' learning. When leaders of a school district determine that changes are necessary to improve learning for the entire grade level, there is a necessary process. First, data is analyzed to determine if the changes are needed. Second, a team is formed to compile research-based evidence to explore possible changes to instructional practices to improve student learning. When those changes are implemented, the process begins to determine student learning has improved. Through the process of changing the 306 rules, the citizens, the parents, the educators, the students have not seen any of the research-based evidence to justify the changes. Where is that research-based evidence that eliminates class size requirements that improves student learning? Where is the research-based evidence that removing educator certification requirements improves student learning? Where is the research-based evidence that outsourcing instructional opportunities improves students' learning? Where is the research-based evidence that centralized curriculum at the state level is better than that at the local level? I'm also concerned that the changes to the 306 rules is bypassing the democratic process. New Hampshire has a long tradition of local control for education. Many of the proposed changes will transfer educational decisions from the local elected officials to the appointed members of this board. Where is the opportunity for the citizens in our local school districts to challenge the changes to the 306 rules that are proposed? Where is the opportunity for recourse for all the citizens to elected officials that will carry out their wishes for their children's education? Finally, every 10 years, New Hampshire public high schools must go through an accreditation process through the New England Association of Schools and Colleges, also known as NEASC. Accreditation ensures that our high schools are providing a standards-based education to all of its students. Without accreditation, students will not be accepted by colleges and universities across the country. The accreditation process ensures that our schools have a rigorous curriculum and that the students are prepared for a post-secondary education. Thank you.
Jacob Bennett from Chester.
Good afternoon. This testimony is from me, Dr. Jacob Bennett, speaking on my own behalf. I'm going to focus on 306.06. This is the culture and climate section. Last year I conducted research into the meaning and value of diversity in education contexts. It's a project that resulted in the publication of the Belonging Case for Diversity, a literature review that you all received last October. My focus in that review was to present empirical studies focused on the impacts of diversity among students and educators, but also, first and foremost, to grapple with and come to a clear and practical understanding of what diversity means. To begin with, I sought a legal understanding, so I turned to the backbone of the historical and legal concept of diversity in American life, which is the 14th Amendment. Records on the debate and drafting of the 14th Amendment make clear that the authors were concerned that the Constitution should protect the rights of all people to have access to necessary public goods, like free schools and open markets, which cultivate and sustain a democratic society and its individual members. I then considered the business case for diversity, which includes significant findings among top-earning corporations that higher rates of diversity within a firm correlate to increased innovation, efficiency, and profitability. These findings run alongside studies in the education literature that show correlation between increased diversity and student outcomes. However, there are also findings from a series of studies that indicate younger professionals and graduate students, particularly those from underrepresented groups, find this instrumental approach to diversity to be alienating. Rather than helping them feel like they belonged, the corporate argument had the opposite effect. This was the real aha moment of the research process for me, because the sense of belonging is exactly what I was reading about in the education literature that indicated improved outcomes for students of color who have even one single teacher of the same race or ethnic background during their school careers. And it was exactly what I was reading about when I was scouring debates about the necessity of equal protection and due process, which promote and enforce the right of public accommodation or the legal right to enter a business open to the public. In other words, diversity is the opposite of those signs that used to say no blacks, no Irish. Diversity is a sign that says all welcome. A proper understanding of diversity then is rooted in the constitutional right to be in and move around within our society. This right is, and this right is nothing short of a right to belong. With that in mind, it is vital to highlight the folly of removing the principle of diversity, the word, I'm talking about the actual word diversity, from Ed 306.06. It is a mistake to assume that the purpose and scope of a mandated, quote, acknowledgement of diversity and respect for differences, which is what it currently says, can be collapsed into mere respect for differences and not suffer tremendous loss of legal leverage to enact programs benefiting underrepresented and or disproportionately impacted groups. Even the addition of the language around equitable opportunities falls well short as a tool for educators and policymakers to rely on, especially compared to the compelling state interest that grounds diversity work. The principles of equal protection and due process were designed to nurture diversity specifically, and in practical use require more than respect for differences. Deleting diversity from existing language in Ed 306.06 cannot be understood as a mere editorial decision, but a fundamental shift away from requiring affirmative policy and toward allowing passive respect for differences. Keep in mind, segregated school populations may learn respect for differences, but they will have a hard time learning what diversity means, and they will have a hard time benefiting from it. Diversity means belonging. Diversity belongs in the 306s. I said this earlier.
Deborah Howe.
If you have questions about the lit review, email me.